Alexander III of Macedon, better known as Alexander the Great, 356 BC to 323 BC, was the son of King Philip II of Macedon and became king after his father's death in 336 BC and later conquered most of the known world of his time. He is known as the Great as much for his military genius as for their diplomatic skills in dealing with the various populations of the regions he conquered. He is still recognized for spreading the culture, the Greek language and thought of Greece throughout Asia Minor, Egypt, and Mesopotamia to India, and thus usher in the Hellenistic period era, 323 to 31 BC. Welcome to the Myths and Curiosities channel. Already leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. When Alexander was young, he was taught to fight and ride by Leonidas of Epirus, a relative of his mother Olympias, as well as endure hardships such as forced marches. His father Philip was interested in cultivating a future refined king and so hired Lysimachus of Acarnania to teach the boy to read, write, and play the lyre. This tutelage would instill in Alexander a love for reading and music at the same time, lifelong. At the age of 13 or 14, Alexander was introduced to the philosopher Greek Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC, whom Philip hired as a teacher. Alexander never imposed Greek culture on the inhabitants of the various regions that he mastered, but only introduced in the same way as Aristotle used to teach his students. Leonidas' influence can be seen in Alexander's resilience and physical resistance throughout his life, as well as in his skill with horses. Alexander is said to have tamed the indomitable Bucephalus when he was only 11 or 12 years old. Alexander seemed destined for greatness from birth. He had, above all, a father whose achievements laid a solid foundation for your later success. While it is clear that his father had a great impact on him, Alexander himself chose to see his success as ordered by forces divine. He called himself the son of Zeus, and thus claimed demigod status, linking his lineage to his two favorite heroes of antiquity, Achilles and Hercules, and modeling his behavior after theirs. This belief in his divinity was instilled in him by his mother Olympias, who also told her that her birth was a virgin, for she had been miraculously impregnated by Zeus himself. Her birth was associated with great signs and wonders, like a bright star shining over Macedonia that night and the destruction of the temple of Artemis in Ephesus. Plutarch writes, Alexander was born the 6th of Hecatombion, the month the Macedonians call Laus, the same day that the temple of Diana at Ephesus was burned. What Hygiejas of Magnesia makes on the occasion of a presumption frigid enough to have stopped the conflagration. The temple, he says, caught fire and was burned while his mistress was absent, assisting in the birth of Alexander, and all the Oriental soothsayers who were then in Ephesus, looking at the ruin of this temple as the harbinger of some other calamity, ran through the city, slapping their faces and crying out that this day had brought something that would prove fatal and destructive for all of Asia. Alexander's military prowess was first noticed in the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. Although only 18 years old, he helped turn the tide of battle in the decisive Macedonian victory that defeated the allied Greek city-states. When Philip II was assassinated in 336 BC, Alexander assumed the throne and, with the cities, Greek states now united under Macedonian rule after Chaeronea, embarked on the great campaign that his father had planned, the conquest of the mighty Persian Empire. Homer was Alexander's Bible, and he took the addition of Aristotle with him to Asia. During his campaigns, Alexander was always intent on discovering everything he could about the areas he passed through. He took with him an entourage of scientists to record and analyze this information, from botany, biology, zoology, and meteorology, even topography. Your desire to learn and to have information recorded as scientifically as possible probably originated from the teachings and enthusiasm of Aristotle. With a Macedonian army of 32,000 infantry and 5,100 cavalry, Alexander crossed into Asia Minor in 334 BC to start your conquest of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, defeating the Persian army led by satraps at the Battle of Granicus in May. He then liberated the cities of Sardis and Ephesus from Persian rule that same year before moving on to others in Asia Minor. In Ephesus, he offered to rebuild the temple of Artemis, who had been destroyed by arson in the night. of his birth, but the city refused his gesture. In 333 BC, Alexander and his troops defeated the larger force of the king Darius III, or 336 to 330 BC, of Persia at the Battle of Issos. Alexander sacked the Phoenician cities of Baalbek and Sidon, which surrendered, in 332 BC and later laid siege to the island city of Tyre. He was so determined to conquer the ancient city of Tyre that he built a bridge from the mainland to the island to mount his machines of siege. This sidewalk, over time, has collected silt and dirt and is the reason for which Tyre is part of the mainland in Lebanon today. For your resistance, stubborn, the townspeople were massacred and the survivors sold as slaves. His policy towards the citizens of Tyre is cited by historians, ancient and modern, as an excellent example of his cruelty. In 331 BC, he conquered Egypt, where he founded the city of Alexandria. At the Oracle of Siwa, in the Egyptian oasis of the same name, he was proclaimed son of the god Zeus Amon. Although he had conquered Egypt, Alexander was not interested in imposing their own ideas of truth, religion, or behavior over the people, provided they voluntarily maintained the lines of open supplies to feed and equip your troops, an important part of its ability to govern vast areas, which would be neglected by their successors. This does not mean, however, that he did not ruthlessly suppress revolts or hesitate to annihilate cruelly those who opposed him. After drawing the plan to the city of Alexandria, he left Egypt for Syria and northern Mesopotamia to proceed with further campaigns against Persia. In 331 BC, Alexander encountered King Darius III again in the camp of Battle of Gaugamela, also called Battle of Arbela, where, once again facing overwhelming numbers, he defeated decisively Darius III, who fled the camp. Alexander then proceeded to take Babylon and Susa, who unconditionally surrendered without resistance. In the winter of 330, Alexander marched towards Persepolis, meeting resistance at the Battle of the Persian Gates, defended by the hero Ariobarzanes, 386 to 330 BC, and his sister Utab. Ariobarzan, 330 BC, at the head of Persian troops. Alexander defeated this strength and took Persepolis, which he then burned. In the summer of 330 BC, Darius III was assassinated by his own general and cousin Bessus, an act that Alexander deplored. The corpse of Darius III was treated with the utmost respect, as were the surviving members from your family. Alexander proclaimed himself king of Asia and continued with his conquest, marching into the region of present-day Afghanistan. In 329 BC, he founded the city of Alexandria Escate on the river Iaxartes, destroyed cities, and so many other battles he fought and won. Bessus, the assassin of King Darius III, was captured and executed by his betrayal against their former king to send the message that disloyalty of that kind would never be rewarded. Alexander founded many cities named after him during this time to promote his public image not only as a liberator, but as a god, and adopted the title Shahanshah, King of Kings, used by the rulers of the First Persian Empire. According to this status, Alexander introduced the Persian custom of proskynesis to the army, forcing those who addressed him to first kneel down and kiss his hand. Alexander was not known for tolerating personal opinions that conflicted with his, and this intolerance was exacerbated by drinking. Cleito's death was quick through a dart that Alexander hurled at him, while Callisthenes was arrested and died in confinement. Both became quite expressive in their criticism as to Alexander's adoption of Persian customs. In 327 BC, with the Persian Empire firmly under their control and newly married to the Bactrian noblewoman Roxana, LC 340 BC 310 BC, Alexander turned his attention to India. Having heard of the exploits of the great Macedonian general, the Indian king Omphis of Taxila submitted to his authority without a fight, but the Aspagioi and Assakinoi tribes resisted tightly in battles throughout 327 BC. And in 326 BC, Alexander subjugated these tribes, finally meeting King Porus of Parava in Battle of the River Hydaspes in 326 BC. Porus attacked Alexander's forces with elephants and fought so hard, bravely with his troops that, after defeating Porus, Alexander, installed as ruler of a region larger than he had previously busy. Alexander Bucephalus' horse was killed in this battle, and Alexander named one of the two cities he founded after the Battle of Bucephala in his honor. Alexander intended to march and cross the river Ganges towards new conquests, but his troops, worn out by the hard battle with Porus, in which, according to Arrian, Alexander lost 1,000 men, mutinied and refused to go further. Alexander tried to persuade his men to go ahead, but failing, win them over, finally agreed to his wishes. He shared his army in two, sending half back to Susa by sea under Admiral Nearchus across the Persian Gulf and marching to the other half through the Gedrosian Desert in 325 BC, nearly a year whole after his troops mutinied. His reasoning behind this decision, both the delay in withdrawing after the riot as to the form it eventually took, is still obscure and debated by historians. Even having abandoned his conquest of the India, he even paused in his march to subdue the tribes. Hostiles he encountered along the way. The rugged terrain of desert and military fighting had a great impact on their troops, and when they reached Susa in 324 BC, Alexander suffered losses considerable. Upon returning, he found that many of the satraps to whom he had entrusted the government had abused their power and executed them as well, like those who had vandalized the tomb of Cyrus the Great. In the ancient capital of Pasargada, he ordered the old capital and the tomb were restored, and he took other steps to integrate your army with the people of the region and merge the cultures of Persia and Macedonia. Around this time, in 324 BC, his longtime friend, possibly his lover, and his second-in-command, Hephaestion, died of fever, although some reports suggest he may have been poisoned. The claim that Alexander was homosexual or bisexual is supported by biographies written after his death, and Hephaestion is routinely named as her lover as well as her best friend. While still processing the grief of Hephaestion's death, Alexander returned to Babylon in 323 BC with plans to expand his empire, but he would never do them. He died in Babylon at age 32 in 10 or June 11th, 323 BC, after suffering 10 days of high fever. Theories about the cause of his death ranged from poisoning to malaria, meningitis, and bacterial infection from drinking contaminated water, among others. Plutarch says that 14 days before his death, Alexander entertained his fleet admiral Nearchus and his friend Medius of Larissa with a long drinking spree, after which he fell into a fever from which he never recovered. When asked who should succeed him, Alexander said, the strongest, whose answer led to his empire was divided among four of his generals, Cassander, Ptolemy, Antigonus and Seleucus, known as the Diadochus or successors. Plutarch and Arrian, however, claim that he passed his reign to Perdiccas, those he was close to with favors. In any case, after Alexander's death, the generals ignored their desires and Perdiccas was assassinated in 321 BC. His longtime comrade would order the execution of the wife of Alexander, Roxana, son of Alexander by her, and of Alexander's mother, Olympia, to consolidate his power as the new king of Macedonia. Ptolemy I is said to have stolen Alexander's corpse when he was away from Macedonia and took him to Egypt in the hope of securing the prophecy that the land in which he was buried would be prosperous and invincible. He would found the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, which would last until 30 BC, ending with the death of her descendant Cleopatra 69 to 30 BC. His influence over the regions they controlled created what the historians call it the Hellenistic period. One of the stipulations of Alexander's will was the creation of a unified empire between former enemies. The peoples of the Near East should be encouraged to marry those of Europe and those of Europe to do the same. In doing so, a new Hellenistic culture would be embraced for all, and it was in this way and with these dreams that Alexander the Great lived. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you liked it, leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being with me this far, and tell me here in the comments what you think of this story. See you in the next video.